Hi, this is John Jackson Miller, Star Wars author. You're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you were looking for.
I think we used up all the perfect. Move.
Everything you stand for.
Freedom scares you.
Freedom. You don't want freedom. You want chaos. Chaos for everyone but you. Ruin the galaxy and then run back to your ridiculous wig. Everything's under control.
That's a bold statement.
I expect to have him ready for interrogation by tomorrow night.
You waited for my day off.
I couldn't risk a leak.
How ironic.
I need to know you're making a choice. I lived most of my life without ever realizing that that was a possibility.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We're getting so close to the end. Maybe that's what Luthen thought in this episode. Hello, friends. My name is Dan Zare, the host of Coffee with Kenobi. Today on this episode, we are going to discuss the 10th episode in Season 2 of Andor. The episode is entitled, Make It Stop. But we don't want this next guy to stop. We have loved him, both as a frequent guest of Coffee with Kenobi, but more importantly, on his own wonderful podcast, the Rebel Base Card Podcast, the one and only Greg McLaughlin. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I love the fact that you have been taking this, I think, the low and slow and the right approach, I think. And it was a pleasure to get the call up. We've been traveling a lot, and so it's nice to be home. But yeah, I'm kind of excited to talk about this one, and especially this last arc. Especially hearing what you have to say, because you're such a big story guy and doing all the, doing what you do for a living. I am kind of excited to hear your thoughts on some of this.
Well, I always love chatting with you naturally, but I remember, I think I was on your Andor season 2 overall review with Dr. Cass.
Yes.
And if memory serves, and I could be wrong, I remember you talking about this episode specifically, the flashbacks, and maybe it didn't hit you in quite the same way that I think it did me. And I thought, well, this would be great because I love the discourse. I love the conversation. And I know you'll have excellent insights. So I'm really looking forward to it. But before we start it, I've got to get your one word and overall sort of reactions to the episode before we dive into it more closely.
Well, thank you. And yes, I'm kind of excited to talk about those flashbacks. And I when I got the call up, I was sitting there like, all right, like a lot of times you kind of give your grades or your words on the fly. And I'm like, all right, no. I've been on Coffee with Kenobi, enough times to go, look, I'm going to really think this through. And I could see there is a word that really comes to mind because I think how the show is paced would lead to the obvious one. No, I'm not. No, I got to bring the good stuff. So I'm going to go with relationship, because I do think that this one really, if you take this episode in and of itself, really shows the relationship between Clea and Luthen, and with the added flashbacks, adds that extra, oomph, because essentially she's got her mission is to kind of, take him out, end him, because of what he might know or what they might get. And it really adds to that. And so you see over the course, with the flashbacks, of course, you see how their relationship started and how it ends, really. Mm-hmm. But I do think that to me, when I was looking at overall, like I could say, I could say certain ones, and you might allude to this of how that was paced and all that. But I do think that at the end of the day, that's the word I kind of took away from it.
Very good. I think this one sort of came to me right away, and usually I use some sort of hyperbolic explanation of how I feel about it. I don't feel like it's going to happen here. My word is tragic. This is a really tragic personal episode. While the Gorman Massacre certainly is the show stealer, the most, as I've said, one of the most powerful episodes of television I've ever seen. I would argue that this tragic one hit me in a very different way because it was much more personal. While seeing the people of Gorman suffer like that was devastating, this is different because we know Luthen, we know Clea, and we know Daedra to in a very different way. And this is just the beginning of her end. But the emotional wallop that this packs, because there's an interconnectivity, a parasocial relationship we have with Luthen and Clea, I think makes this one so powerful and profound for me.
I like that because, like, first I would come to mind and saying, like, the tension really gets carried through there. That was the word that kind of first came to mind. But I do think that, because everyone kind of know what she's trying to do or what's coming, and it gets punctuated by those flashbacks. I think it's really one of those where at the end you're starting to wonder, is it going to happen? Is she going to be able to do it? How is she going to be able to do it? And, then it really, I think for her, I mean, this is like Clea's moment. And then after that, the fallout over the next couple of episodes of this arc really, I think it gets earned in a certain way. Like I said, we can go back to our episode on it to kind of get my other thoughts on how that ended. But I would say in this one, right, it is something where it's like you've seen how much they've built and how much they're responsible for.
Yes.
To get the rebellion off the ground, but yet it has to come to a close. They have to burn everything, and then she has to take him out, as it were.
Well, let's. I've got a couple of major topics that I want to bring up, but I'd love to kind of hear where you'd like to take us first.
Just because in revisiting this, and I think it was one of the first times I think I went back through this episode in quite some time. And, at the end, when we did our kind of our season recap, I had feelings on the flashbacks because I think they have been, we can kind of go back and forth on how well they've been done in different Star Wars series and things like that. But at the end, I think in and of itself, I think the flashbacks do support this episode in as far as it really hits it home. I don't, though, feel, because I would say, and you may agree with me or not, real estate, Star Wars TV real estate time is incredibly important. It comes at a premium, especially when you see some of the other series that, Andor was nice enough that it got to go almost a full, like 45 minutes to an hour. So we had a lot of story. There was a lot there. But I do feel at the end, this arc had a very hard mission to do, was to try to get us up to Rogue One. And so when I saw at the end of how maybe some of the characters, especially Mon Mothma, doesn't quite get a lot of screen time at the end, then I start to kind of look back at these flashbacks as the show spending currency that later on it does not have. And I'm not necessarily talking about like money going into CG and things like that. I'm just talking about like there were a couple of things as we're watching this series go, especially with Mon Mothma, that I think you could have carried forward because I still think there was a little bit there to go. I mean, she has a great moment in Welcome to the Rebellion, all right, friends everywhere, and all that. But she it kind of goes back and Andor gets that front and center. But in this case, once again, we see Luthen and Daedra right away. It happens. And it's almost like, you could see this coming where they go right to it. I'm like, all right, they're getting this out of the way so we can do other things. I just felt that was time that we could have banked elsewhere because we already kind of knew that they had a relationship. Very close. They were very tight. They worked in pieces. It could have even been worked in over the course of the season instead of stacked into this one. But I do think that this takes away from what could have been later. Even though, I loved getting the backstory, which gave more questions than answers, especially when it didn't. Was that Naboo? Was that, where were they at? All this kind of stuff. It was fascinating, but I felt like that could have been a book. It could have been a great book. Let's get Kevin Scott on it, man. But I just felt that, they went here. I just think it took the place of something else that I was wanting to kind of live in the now with some storylines that were in the now. And so that I think going back over it to make a long story longer was the thing that kept coming back to me.
Well, so you made me think about something that I'm glad you brought up. For one thing, Star Wars historically doesn't do flashbacks. Not really. So the fact that we have it here, as much as I see what you're saying, and I agree with you that it would be nice to just live in that present moment. I think I said maybe on your show that these two in the past, in the formation of their bond and their very unique familial connection that they have, this I think this was essential. I think without the flashbacks, I don't care near as much about Luthen dying, other than the fact that he's someone that I spent a lot of FaceTime with. He's been an essential part of the Andor series, but you never really see him as a father figure or a human being. He's like a machine. He's even tied up to a machine at the end that he needs to breathe, which is interesting. There's a neat little Darth Vader parallel, but that's where the parallel ends. The connection he has with Clea, naming her, naming himself, that has power, that has meaning. There's a connection there, but it goes beyond just a simple father and surrogate father-daughter thing. This is about survival. I think she doesn't have any innocence, so that isn't rubbing off on Luthen. But what is rubbing off is she is the living embodiment of what he witnessed in that tank. I assume it was a tank of some sort, or some sort of a vessel. And he keeps mumbling, and on the captions, they keep showing this phrase that he keeps saying, and I don't know what the phrase is. I mean, I see the phrase. I didn't write it down, but I don't know what the translation is. But he does keep saying, "Make it stop, make it stop," and it's almost like we're watching someone have a nervous breakdown or a very horrific panic attack, and all these people are dying. We hear on the radio feedback over and over again that we don't think there's anyone left to kill. Let's bring in the heavy guns anyway. It's this overkill, this onslaught, this horrible, homicidal explosion, literally and figuratively. It's genocide for these people. And she is a survivor. And so at the end of it, there's this great scene where, like you said, it could be Naboo. I'm not really sure where it is, where he hands her this detonator, sort of calling her bluff. And I think he's also curious to see how she'll react. Well, I push this detonator. He takes her to this beautiful establishment, and he wants her to see what she will be throwing away. There's families. It's gorgeous. There's fine food. There's excellent drink. And she's, yeah, I see it. But I don't think she quite appreciates it. And then at the end, she looks around, and she's about to push it, and he takes it away. And he says to her something along the lines of, I didn't realize that I actually have a choice. I want you to see that you have a choice. He lets her take the choice, albeit under very pressure-filled circumstances. And then he takes it away from her. And not like Lucy with the football and Charlie Brown, but in a way to say, okay, she is committed. She did choose to do it. I didn't make her do it, but I'm not going to let her. It is my job to form this woman, to teach her to survive, because his opinion of the Empire and where the galaxy is quite bleak, and understandably so. And he says, what I'm afraid of is what I might be doing to you. And then they form a connection there. Is it healthy? No. It reminds me sort of, if you ever watch the show Dexter, it's how his father kind of raised Dexter to be who he is now. Dexter and Clay are very different characters, thank goodness. I'm saying a lot of things, but it's fun to see your expressions as I'm saying certain things. So to sum up, I think that this flashback gives us a different side of Luthen that was not possible before we see him with Clea as a young woman. And then that's why move at the beginning of this episode, when he tells her to move, we see where that came from. She gets a smile. And I think it just makes the ending so much more beautiful and tragically sad.
I like what you said there, and especially I think
which part I talked for like 20 minutes.
The structure of these, and I would agree that over the course of the two seasons, we have really not seen the veil lifted on Luther very much. I think when we go back to season one, that one time where he's putting his costume back on, and he's pantomiming his, when he's in his role as the curator or whatnot, and then he kind of drops it for a second and you kind of see it. And you start to see it at the beginning of this episode when, he has this monologue about that there's so much information and you can kind of see he's kind of off a step. But in the first flashback, especially because in the further, as the three go along, you start to see where his, how he can kind of coach everybody, especially in Andor season 1. He's talking to Cassian, or he's working with Clea and whatnot. Where the first one, where he's just really sort of in shell shock, as it were, and then he sees Clea, and as this is the one thing I really seem to have control over. I go, okay, I like that part, and I do love. I was when I was marching down these lines, and I'm going to brutalize this. All you know now is how much you hate. You bank that. That's in the second one. And I really thought that, because she has this raw emotion of watching that firing squad. Mm-hmm. And she's like, and then he's trying to go, you need to kind of focus this. And then especially at last where, look at me. And then, and then it blows up and then he kind of goes, but I like that. Like I said, the structure of them are very interesting. I think it moves him along. I think it does show. I just think where it is and what it maybe takes away from. And maybe, like I said, maybe I'm railing against this because I know it's happening in episode 12. But I do think that, like I said, it's odd. I know that sometimes we've seen flashbacks, good part of it, let's say we go to Acolyte where it's kind of like, okay. But here, so well done, written. I just, and I, like I said, in and of itself, I think it really serves the story well. Totally agree with you there. I just do think when we see what they choose to put on screen, then you go, oh, okay. Because a lot of times you're trying to dart left and right. Where are they going to go? And
do you find it interrupts the narrative? I mean, maybe not because you keep saying you like the structure, but is that why? Because I think it works well, as I've already babbled on about, but I think this could easily be like a spin-off where we just see Skarsgård and this actor who plays Clea as a young girl. I think that would be a great spin-off to kind of show the formation of it as well. But I don't know. So what do you think?
It's interesting because in the Acolyte, right? Remember how we kind of go along and then there was all of a sudden it pulls us out and we have almost like that, a show based on, earlier years of, and, you can kind of go back and forth, and don't get me started on the Kyendi Mundi thing. Cause that just really, it was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. What people did, not the story that don't get me.
No, I get you.
But in this voice, yeah, I think I'm more used to, let's just go forward, because as soon as you get snapped back, I think you're just like, but what's happening? And, it is a way to kind of move pieces along and you kind of come back to it. But, I think it could have been served better elsewhere. Or like anything, let's go back to, like other shows that, sometimes, we know that this was supposed to get many seasons and they kind of truncated it. And you go, this may have been, in maybe this particular arc, like where earlier on, I think you could go, okay, I like how it, condenses his part. Maybe there's not a whole lot going on in between, but then you start to go, wow, wouldn't it have been great if we did it have to be 12? Could it have been 13? Could you have had 4 episodes instead of 3 in an arc? Does that make an arc anymore? No, because an arc, so you start to kind of go, I think it kind of takes me out a bit, because then I start thinking of logistics and a whole separate, discussion on TV versus movie, especially as, I just recently watched Thunderbolts. I got to watch it on the plane, but because we've been out, but it's one of those where sometimes I think maybe it takes me out a little bit, and then you start, your mind starts to wonder. Otherwise, this show has been, like especially the third arc was just, you're on your seat just going, what's happening? And I think maybe it just kind of jerks me out a bit. And I still sit and listen, but yeah. If you take that out, does it affect the impact of this? I think it does. I agree with you on that. I just, like I said, it's a high price to pay later on, I think.
Interesting. Well, gosh, I love that. I think I don't know. I think this is necessary. I don't think the story works without the flashbacks, because I guess as I look at it, I don't see it as a flashback so much as her life with him is flashing before her eyes, because she knows what the end game is. And I wrote that it was Clea's sacrifice. It's Luthen's sacrifice, which I want to talk about here in a second. But it's also Clea's sacrifice, because she's sacrificing the only person who's ever shown her the remotest. I mean, it's not like Clea's going to go have a family. I don't think that's a possibility, because I don't think that she's in that headspace. But this man was her family. You couldn't get him a more unorthodox family, but this is war. And she is reliving the most important aspects of the formation, the fundamental formation of their lives. And it just hits me. In fact, I might say that more than any of them, this one impacted me more the second time than any of the other ones. I did not expect that. But I want to talk about the opening. It's a year later. Everyone is a year later. I still not 100% convinced that that's an effective persuader, although I know that they just want to kind of get to where we need to go, because now we know we're a year before the Battle of Yavin. It's important. But Luthen and Daedra meet for the first and last time this whole series. And by the way, as an aside, isn't it fascinating that this is called Andor and he doesn't appear at all in this episode? Not even mentioned. And neither is, of course, Genevieve O'Reilly, because she's on Yavin. I just want to hear what you thought about that confrontation, because it is a beat by beat. And I watched the performance several times during this rewatch, because I just wanted to drink it and savor the actors at the top of their game here, the gamesmanship, the disdain they have for one. I think she hates him because of what she believes he is, the ultimate fly in the ointment of her precious empire. But I think for him, he doesn't hate her any more than any other Imperial. It's just that she is one of the symbols of their flawed and fascist regime. And it's just a great back and forth.
I absolutely love this interaction, especially with the buildup, as we kind of see beforehand, where he seems kind of a bit off of his game, and they're, him and Claire are trying to discuss what happens next. And then, of course, the door rings, and he goes into it, and it's just this really masterclass. It's really great to see. And it's like, when he starts, oh, what an excellent question.
I love really... your impression is good. It also jumps into Watto a little bit, but not too much. I love it.
It's this thank you. This back and forth between them, because it's a chess match and it goes really fast. And I think what's nice is you're not expecting it this fast. And so you're like, whoa, this is happening. And you're wondering, where this is going to go. When is she going to kind of show her hand? And she's carrying that case, and having been to the National, Sports Collectors Convention last week, I saw a lot of those kind of cases on the show floor, with kids carrying on their cards and so forth. But when she finally pulls out the start pad, and he goes, "Okay, Jake, this is where it starts getting real." That's where I sort of like, when she kind of asks him, like, what here is real or fake, and he's like, but it does sound a little like Watto. But I did feel that. I think we got the payoff, right? I think she's been kind of after him. It was going to happen, but I really felt this was a top performance of the series. I really liked it, and she's showing such great chops. He's just going to town, and it's kind of nice that they have this moment by themselves. Because she, of course, and mistakenly so, did not bring in everybody, just knock it out. She wanted to grandstand a bit. She knew exactly what she was doing. He knew exactly what she was doing. We kind of knew exactly what she was doing, but we still got to have it. And that was a great moment.
Well, and like, as she's getting to it, I think he knows what she's thinking. So when they're talking about the value of this little dagger, essentially, then she starts talking about how this big prize is a little damaged, but it's held its value. And it seems to me clear that she's talking about Luthen himself. He kind of does this little exhale, and then she just can't help herself. The they throw away the facade. She's like, I have dreamed of this so many times. You can't even imagine what I've been thinking about. And then she gets so mad at herself because he's there all this time under her nose. So I'm sure there's a pride thing. But then she says, you're hiding in the shelter of imperial peace and quiet. So like these things you say you hate, you're just benefiting from our rule over the galaxy, which of course is a very skewed way of remembering what the Empire is doing. I think it's important, and it just made me remember what I was going to say earlier about the flashbacks. He says to her, do you want to know why? In other words, do you want to know why I'm fighting against the Empire and why I've thwarted you at every single pass? This is why the flashbacks are important. Without the flashbacks, we don't have Luthen's why. We don't have Clea's why. It's not enough to know they don't like the Empire. We get that everybody doesn't like the Empire unless they're Imperial to a degree. But we don't know why he hated them. Now we do. We didn't know why she hated them. Now we do. And the fact that Daedra doesn't want to know about this man is so profound. You know, he says for that freedom scares her. And she says, you don't even know what freedom is. And then they get the Imperial line about, you know, it's not you want chaos for everyone but yourself. You really don't even understand. It's like everybody in the galaxy is a child and they can't handle it. Well, we're going to bring this order and chaos. What they really mean is control and the removal of freedom, which he shows in the flashback that he is giving Clea, and he allows her to choose her path.
It's interesting that she, you know, you want chaos, right? Is that it's all about him instead of something greater. And so she doesn't quite see. But what about the line that happened that, you know, that he can sum up? The rebellion isn't here anymore. It's flown away. It's everywhere. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to discuss you. I love that I love that line. I love how it kind of like, it really surmises in that sentence where the rebellion is. Like, it's already gone. You're too late.
Yeah, it's flown away. It's here. It's there. It's everywhere now.
But and
then he punctuates it with, there's a whole galaxy out there waiting to discuss you, which I really like.
So awesome. What a great line.
I think it's a top scene in the entire series. It's just really terrific.
Agreed.
I feel like every episode I'm saying something. I mean, this is just a great, great series. What's the next thing you want to talk about on your list?
Let's see. Get back. You know, we kind of talked, like I said, we talked about the flashbacks. I think as far as Clea's mission itself, right? Because she has to kind of take herself out. You know, she's watching him being taken away.
Yep.
And then she has to go back to the safe house, and then she has to plan this amazing infiltration, right? And at the same time, Daedra is getting arrested, and I love her sort of reaction. You know, she's like, you know, here's her subordinate arresting her. You know, if you kind of go back, and this is really coming full circle.
And a total rival.
Oh yes, and we'll sort this out. We'll get this sorted. But I would say, you know, that's where when we talked about like what's your one word, and I say tense. I mean, that whole sequence of her going, finding the uniform, getting in there, taking out, planning the bomb that pulls everything away, that had me on my seat. I think that is really top tier stuff. I really, like I said, it's kind of her finest hour, I think. And I think, although I understand what happens in later episodes, it's kind of a shame where it kind of goes there, me personally. But I do think that was such a great sequence. And I really love the layout of the hospital. I was kind of curious, you know, you follow story. How is the pacing for you? How is this whole thing kind of move along? Is it in fact her finest hour?
It's edge of your seat. It's like, in fact, when I was watching it, especially when Clea is sneaking around, I'm thinking, okay, this is espionage. This is like, oh gosh, what was that? The Americans? Was that the show with Kerry Russell where she was a Russian? It reminded me of that kind of a tense feeling. And the actor who plays Clea is escaping me at the moment, but I think I've been saying that she might be my favorite character in the series, and this episode is a prime example of why. But the Daedra thing is so ironic because it's her worst hour. I mean, it's it's one of her finest actors as a performer, but as a character, this is the beginning of her end because she is being betrayed by one of her peers in the ISB, but it shouldn't be expected. She's not really being betrayed because she subverts him. She stages this coup on his day off so he won't interfere, but not because he is an imbecile or incompetent, because she doesn't want anyone taking the glory. Her great tragedy is her incredible pride and this thirst to prove herself, because she doesn't want to have to share the act. I mean, she did all the work by herself, so I completely get that. But the great irony here is that if these two had worked together, if the ISB had worked together instead of the infighting that we see with all the Imperials, not only would they have been successful, but Luthen probably would have survived. And they could have, well, I don't think he would have given anything. I really don't. But they would at least have had a chance, or she at least could have had a chance to sort of prove herself. But ultimately, she becomes yet another scapegoat. Although I'm breaking my rule. Never mind. Maybe we'll find out when we watch the next episode.
Well, and it's also interesting because this happens after Gorman. So it's already been kind of this kind of a cluster that happened at Gorman. And so really, instead of kind of like, kind of regrouping a bit, and of course it's a year later, she kind of doubles down, or at least, in terms of what we see, kind of doubles down going, all right, this is going to happen. But we already kind of knew she wasn't supposed to be on this anymore. And Partagaz had given her warning. It's like, first, don't create the myth and then lose it, catch the guy and then work the story, as it were. But it's kind of an interesting, tragic end. But something else. How about, and we kind of maybe we could almost skipped over this. How about, like his confrontation with Jung?
I just about going to talk about that.
Excellent.
I mean, Lonnie, is it Jung or Young? I'm assuming it's Jung.
Probably Young or Jung.
Yeah, it depends if we're talking about a great mind of the past. This happens quickly. Their confrontation. Well, it's not a confrontation. He's desperate. He snuck into the archives. He knows all about, what's the order he says of the things?
Oh, because he starts going like Kyber, Urso.
It's a Jeddah, Kyber, Urso. But actually, that's the title of episode 12. But he gives all the information that this is the whole thing has been building towards. The stakes couldn't be higher, and he's frightened. He has sacrificed everything too. This is also his tragedy because he's going to end up being killed by Luthen. Now, we don't see it. That's a directorial choice, a story choice, which I'm grateful for, because I think we're seeing, I think if he, again, this is all structural stuff. I think if we see him kill Young here, then I think it makes his relationship with the young Clea skewed a little bit. Even though we know what's happening, we don't see it. This disillusioned soldier has to go through this thing. And Stars.com says, by the way, they spend 17 years together. So that gives us some time context, which I think is important.
I think it would be a very eye for an eye, right? I think he would, especially at the end, going, well, he killed somebody, and now it's his turn. But I do think, we've seen his one or two interactions already with this, with this spy, and you kind of had to feel like it wasn't maybe going to end well, especially. But that whole, he's got one more piece of information, one more chip to play. And Luthen just kind of has to be like, look, I'm going to take it to Yavin. And then he just has to kind of spill it. And at that point, it's going to be a tragic ending. But, you start to maybe think about what's this guy been seeing and reading, and what has he been holding on to? And I think it adds a nice little bit of depth to him, because you go, how would you even, this is such a big fraud. How would you get it out? And you see it as Luthen has Clea repeat it back to him, which is amazing. It's a part of it. And in some cases, maybe it takes a little bit away from Andor's, first encounter, where you're like, well, this guy had some information about the Death Star. I mean, they came short of saying Death Star, so that,
Yeah.
you know, you do kind of feel like, okay, there's a little bit of overlap. The only thing that I would have said is I think this might have been a very good time to instead of just saying Urso, maybe add a little bit more of Galen Urso, or at
They
some
do say
point,
Galen Urso.
I mean, to add a little more of that to it. I think it could have, you know, I don't think we were going to see Mads Mikkelsen in this series, but I think you could have add more, or maybe that there's a daughter out there or something like that. I think, like I said, once you start getting to these last episodes, you start going, man, you know, it was hard to tie all this in and snip all this within the confines that they were given as far as how much showtime, how much this and that,
sure,
based on what is. But I think that might have been an opportunity there to say, once again, I'm nitpicking, man. This is a great series.
No, I love the discourse. I thought about that too, how it would have been fun or would have been cool. But I'm also glad they didn't, because they're assuming, for one thing, if we're supposed to feel the tension, then we have to feel like we're living in the footsteps of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's all going to be revealed or not, that has to come out later, because that makes the reveals in Andor that much, or in Rogue One, that much more of a pop moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that pops out at you, not a Funko Pop. And that, I think that's pretty cool. I think that's an important thing, because we do learn this Emperor's Energy program is a farce. It was actually a cover story for a weapon of mass destruction. And it's like when Luthen realizes, well, this has to stop. And unfortunately, Jung is a loose end. And he's panicked. You know, loose lips sink ships kind of a thing. So this is another sacrifice, another element of the tragedy that this man has been forced into. And it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. You feel for him. You're sad for him. You're sad. You're not quite sad for Daedra yet. But there is an element there of pain that makes things really challenging and problematic. And it just really moves me. This is a huge thing.
Agreed. And it's also interesting that, you know, I'm not trying to grasp for straws here, but it's interesting that we happen to be talking about this when the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombings, and sort of like the Manhattan Project and all the secrecy behind this, and, you know, what that all had to go into play, because no one really saw that coming until it kind of did. So it's interesting to kind of see this play out, as we're talking about it at the same time. But it really adds to that tension.
Right. And it does say on StarWars.com that it is Naboo where they set out that explosive. So that's canonical facts right there for you. The ending, when she gives him a kiss, and then when she goes down as he breathes his last, that's such a beautiful shot. If you look closely, it looks like he's somewhat smiling or somewhat relieved. I think for him, it's been a burden to carry this weight. How could it not be? It's insurmountable. And he has set things in motion. In many ways, you could say that if not for Luthen and Clea, there is no Crew of the Ghost. There is no Red 5 standing by. You know, maybe none of this stuff ever happens. And casting is a huge part of that. But when they just fade out for an extremely long time. I didn't count how many seconds it is. I don't know cinematography or production to that degree. But it's a very, very slow fade out. And the light slowly gets a little less bright, and then finally it's just non-existent. And boy, oh boy, is that spectacular. I really, it leaves you, and then the music kind of, there's some silence for a while. I mean, we feel this pain. We feel the loss of this man who could just be some grumpy old sailor type that just hates the Empire. But now that we know more about him, and I love the fact that before he changed his name is Lear, which is a great Shakespearean tragic name of a king who had 3 daughters, and 2 of them fake their love just to get the accolades, and he's rejected by them, and he ends up losing his mind. I'm not saying Luthen is King Lear, but the fact that they're both people that have unusual relationships with their daughters, that are not unusual but just unconventional. Although we root for both of them, but Luthen didn't lose his mind, although he could have. And I think if not for Clea, he would have. Whereas Lear's daughters, Lear's daughters are the reason he goes mad. Luthen's surrogate daughter is the reason he doesn't. And he uses that and he channels that violence and that hate that he tells her to do later to good. You lose and you lose and you lose and you lose again until you finally win. Amazing.
I love that. I love that. See, I knew this was what I was waiting for. I'm waiting for the payoff for Dan Z. Then this is why you listen towards the end of the podcast, because you're going to get the good stuff, kids.
Well, thank you. Hey, I feel pretty good about where we're at. We've broken down the important aspects of this. I mean, yes, the whole end sequence is very thrilling and espionage filled and exciting, tragic and beautiful. But I'm ready to give my letter grade. Craig, if you are, unless you've got something else you want to bring up, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, let's hear your letter grade and final thoughts.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
All right. I'm going to give this a solid B. I think structurally it works. I think it gets us to where we need to go. In and of itself, this was a fun rewatch. And like I said, I think those flashbacks do serve this story in and of itself really well. I know what's kind of coming. And so for me, there's a little bit of bittersweetness just because I know that I just couldn't get more of the present, because I knew that later on there's some strings that were a little shorter. This could have been, like I said, this is what really kind of comes to mind, and maybe unfairly. But the scenes we were talking about between Deidre and Luthen, and I think Clea's mission, and it just is really well done. And like I said, I think this had a very hard task to follow that third arc. That following week. I almost came in with not as much expectation, because you go, how do you top this? And remember, this is all within the confines of that one evening, right? Where we go from, 3 episodes. And if some of my reviews are to be believed, then I would say even some of our listeners were like, we get it on the arc thing. Let it go. And I was like, all right, fair enough. I'm water under the bridge, as it were. But I would say in this case, it's fun to kind of take these on its own, because I think you do get a little more breath with it. And I enjoyed this, and it was also a fun discussion. So solid B. I just think I know, like I said, as it gets harder as it goes along. 11 and 12 get even a little harder, and I'll be very curious your thoughts as we kind of get to there.
Sure. Well, gosh. This is an A+, because it's I don't think the first time I watched it I was at A+, because coming off the heels of the other 3, the previous 3. But I'm not a teacher who thinks there's only a certain percentage of A's. If you get an A, you get an A. It's not fair to hold other excellence against you. This is so good because it's such an incredible character piece of Luthen and Clea. It also ties in the tragedy of Jung, whose name I mispronounced probably 45 times in this episode. And we get the beginning of the end of Daedra, as I mentioned. That closing sequence, the fact that it's a showcase for probably my favorite characters in the entire series. It's just very moving, very powerful, and in a very sweet, beautiful, tragic end to a very tragic man who's known so much suffering and so much hate that he uses for the greater good, and gives his life to keep the rebellion secret. While many people thought he might have been cavalier with life, it's in fact the opposite. He's not cavalier with the people. Even Mon Mothma's friend, who was her childhood friend, that she mourned his loss when he got cold feet and started to have his own internal problems. Luthen is not cavalier with life. He just has to look at everything in a much, much different way that I hope and pray no one listening to the show ever has to even come within a million miles of considering. So that's why it's an A+.
Well said, well said. And, like I said, as nitpicky as I can be, I mean, this was some of the best Star Wars we've seen. And I think it's such a a high water mark that other series, fairly or unfairly will get kind of judged against. But I do like the fact that it's there and it does kind of show you. And, as we were kind of alluding to in some of the episodes we had you on, that I'm excited to see what other creators can do. And, whether it's, it doesn't always have to be about all this action. A lot of it is about, as you a lot of times will allude on episodes of stories that you're not crazy about. It's like, give me a story. I want to see that. Mm-hmm. And these moments will pay off if you put in your time, put in the work, and put in the story, so that, like, hey, who doesn't like to see, flashing swords and all that kind of stuff? We're in for it. But there's a chance to really make it something special. And I think in this case, we really got something special. And I'll be excited because I think kind of probably by the time you're done, we're going to probably start talking about the individual episodes. Hey, let's just keep talking about Andor, keep going. Not much else to talk about at the moment. So,
right.
But I think it's deserving of that kind of praise and discussion. And I'm all for it.
And please don't ever apologize for like giving it the grade that you did. I think that's cool. Like, I think that the honesty, and I've always loved the integrity of the Coffee with Kenobi family, because we're not going to like everything, but we have an excellent way to explain it, and we learn so much more from each other in the discourse. And I for one am grateful, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on for this episode. And
thank you.
As always, you never disappoint. And look, there's much more of Greg for you to enjoy. Greg, please tell us where they can find you and what's going on with Rebel Base Card.
We had to take a bit of a pause after the London Film and Comic-Con show, which was amazing. And shout out to Daz Davies for keeping me company and helping me on one of my episodes there. Yes. And of course, we had Mark Mulcaster and Mark Newbold of Fantha Tracks. Got to see them live and doing their podcast in person. But I would just say that, there's audio that I got from the National, Sports Collectors Convention. That was last week here, right? And we had to kind of leave right after it kind of started. But we have more card talk. We've got a release coming up very soon. Top Star Wars Chrome 2025 will be out, I think, later this month. So we'll get to see some of that. And you may see it actually in your local GameStop, Target, or Walmart. And it'll be exciting to get a release that is a little more open. And then I think the big thing, of course, as I kind of alluded to, Greg Cass and I will be kind of doing our second breakfast, as it were, where we kind of we knew that everything kind of came down, it seemingly in that 1 month. But we're going to try to break down, like you have been doing, Andor, and inviting folks on, yourself and all that, to kind of like go over this. And that's kind of the fun part, right? And you've had different guests on each week, and we kind of do something similar where there's a lot of great dialogue out there, a lot of great folks. And like you, I'm like, I want to hear their takes. We kind of want to do it, and everybody kind of has their own way of doing it, but it makes it fun. And I just think because there's so much to talk about here, you pick up on a thread, we might pick up on a thread, someone else picks up on a thread, a lot of great stuff out there. And it's kind of fun to engage that community while we're kind of waiting for our next, as some of the conventions wind down. Fan Expo Chicago is coming up in a couple of weeks, that kind of thing. So it's just really kind of fun, and keep that conversation going, just as you always say.
A huge thank you to Greg McLaughlin for joining me to talk about this incredible episode. Andor, I look on my calendar, there was a time where I thought, gosh, we were spending so much time on this. Eventually it's going to end, and it's about to end. We've got 2 episodes left. There are no shows on the horizon to talk about or review, but I think that's going to be just fine. You know what? We've got almost 50 years of Star Wars conversations to have. There's so much content out there, so many great people, places, and events that have to do with the Star Wars experience. And on Coffee with Kenobi, I want to bring you all of that, especially with this incredible community that we have, and the way we all look at Star Wars with our own unique agenda, and the way we look at Star Wars in our own special way with our memories, our insights, and our passion for this galaxy far, far away. Thank you again so much for joining me each and every week on Coffee with Kenobi. I am Dan Zare, and this is the podcast you're looking for. See you next time, my friends. For all things Star Wars, news, reviews, videos, and more, head to our home base, coffeewithkenobi.com. Don't forget to join the CWK Cafe on Facebook at coffeewithkenobi.com/community. Our family-friendly, spoiler-free group for all your Star Wars thoughts, comments, and conversation. This podcast is possible thanks to the incredible support of the CWK Alliance. Want to help keep the show brewing? For as little as $1 a month, you can join the CWK Alliance and get access to CWK Pour-Over, our exclusive weekly audio and video podcast. Learn more at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. And know this, 10% of your monthly contributions goes directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Want to connect? You can email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com. Follow me on X at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR, Instagram, Threads, at DanZerCWK, and Blue Sky. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can follow Coffee with Kenobi across social media on X, Instagram, Threads, Pinterest, and Blue Sky, and give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi. And if you want to send an email to the show, you can email us feedback at coffeewithkenobi.com. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find over 700 videos, including past live shows, events, and this podcast. Please take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps more Star Wars fans find our little corner of the galaxy. Do you need a speaker for your next event? Visit danzmedia.com. I love to discuss mythology, leadership, storytelling, or create something tailored to your audience. And finally, grab your CWK gear at coffeewithkenobi.com/shop and show your support in style.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.